Welcome to another episode of I'm Dying to Tell You. This is Dr. Mark Goulston. And as you've probably heard in prior episodes, I'm not going to die soon. At least I don't think so, but I'm going to die a lot sooner than I thought I would. And ever since I heard the prognosis, which could be anywhere from 5 months to 5 years with a median survival of less than 2 years, unless a bone marrow transplant changes that, but we'll see. But since this has happened, the universe has been revealing things to me that I have to share with you. And, if this is not to your liking, and if you're thinking, who wants to hear from a dying old man, tune it out. But in today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about the power of mentors. And I'm going to be doing other episodes on this because if you haven't had a mentor, you've really missed out on something. I've had 8 mentors. The last one was Larry King from CNN. And before him was a big leadership guru named Warren Bennis. Anybody in leadership knows who he is. And they've all died. And one of the things that I've used them for is that whenever I mess up, I tend to beat up on myself. And I'm not that good at positive affirmations and all that. And I'm a little bit envious of people who that actually works on. But I just call upon any of my dead mentors. And I get them to talk me down from being really upset with myself. And my first mentor started back in med school, and it was a dean of students who I think, I definitely know changed my life, but I think he saved my life. And I just paid forward kind of what he did for me. And part of my focus in my lifetime was on suicide prevention. And I guess it's an achievement, but none of my patients died from suicide in 35 years. And maybe we'll talk about that at another time, but I want to talk about mentors. And there's different kinds of mentors. What was special about my mentors is when I saw them, I put a smile on their face. Yeah, we could talk about projects and other things, but when I saw any of them, I put a smile on their face. They were glad to see me. I was not a burden. And that was totally independent about what we would talk about. In fact, a lot of times we didn't even know what we would talk about. But I want to talk about this episode today because it's a little bit bittersweet and maybe a little charming. So Larry King was my last mentor. I was part of a group that used to meet every morning in Beverly Hills at some delicatessen. It had been going on for over 20 years, and I was the last member, which meant that, once a week I would pay at one of the places, and we'd alternate. And it was really a quirky group, and sometimes interesting people from all over the country would come in and visit. And I remember early on, they'd be bantering. Larry would actually hold court. He wasn't usually a big talker, but people loved to be in his presence and people would like to talk. And I didn't talk that much. And they'd be bantering about the Dodgers. And I liked the Dodgers, but, I didn't have front row seats like Larry King. And, they'd be bantering about something else. And I just listened intently. And one day, Larry says to me, "You're so morose." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "What are you listening for?" I said, I'm listening to all of you, and I really don't have anything to say, but I'm listening, I'm learning, I'm enjoying it. And I said, "I'm happy to leave. I don't want to bring you down." And then with that smile, that rascal smile, he said, No, we need Dr. Morose. Sometimes it gets the best of ourselves, and we need it, and it gets a little away from us. And, Dr. Morose, we need you here to center it. And in fact, Larry was my first guest episode on my podcast, my wake-up call. I think it was episode 2 after the introduction. And I didn't really know him that well, but on episode 81, we had him back on. And by then, we'd become friends. And I had him on episode 81. And what he talks about is he says, you got a conference, big conference, people are happy. You got to hire Dr. Morose. Dr. Morose can take the happiness out of room. He can suck the life out of anything. And if it looks like your conference is just going too far and people are too excited, you bring in Dr. Morose. I said, Larry, how can you say that? But we had that kind of relationship. But what I wanted to share with you is something a little more touching. So I got to know Larry and his family and all the illnesses he went through. I mean, he lived through so many illnesses towards the end of his life. And on occasion, I would visit him and hypnotize him to see if we could get him to eat, because he was like skin and bones. And occasionally it would work, and it was interesting. He once said to me, he said, Dr. Morose, I've had a lot of hypnotists on my shows on CNN and all this stuff. And I didn't think any of them could ever hypnotize me. But you have. Well, part of it is I wanted him to eat. I wasn't there to entertain. And there was one time when I went over to his house, and there he was lying on top of his bed with the suspenders on over his white shirt. And, and I was hypnotizing him to see if we could get his appetite back. And I had this crazy idea as I looked at him that it was the last time I was going to see him. It was, I'm not sure if COVID had started, but it was heading down that road. And I don't know, I just had this feeling that I wasn't going to see him again. The delicatessens were closed down. And so he wakes up, and I'm just looking at him. And I look at him, and he said, "What?" I said, "Larry, one last thing." And he looked at me, and I said, "What?" And I looked at him and looked into his eyes like I'm looking into yours. And I actually am starting to feel that towards you. Because what I said to Larry is, Larry, I love you. And I just looked at him. And then he looked at me and he said, I love you, Morose. So how often do you get to see someone for the last time and be able to share that? And what I'm telling you is, don't wait until it's the last time. A lot of times people will say, well, we know we love each other. And with a lot of other cultures, they say, we don't say that. We show it by, bringing each other food, doing things like that. And maybe Americans, are different, that we sometimes like to say the words, and we sometimes like to hear the words. I love all my mentors. I like to think that maybe some of them love me. It'll change your life. If you've never had a mentor, have one. And guess what? It doesn't have to be a real one. There's a book, I forget the title of it. It's by Coach John Wooden at UCLA. I think it's The Power of Mentoring. And he talks about having been mentored by Abraham Lincoln. He was old, but Wooden had never met him. Mother Teresa, and people in his life. And in the book, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton, and other people talking about being mentored by Coach. And you got the feeling when you read what they had to say that if you were to ask them, what were some of the highlights in your entire career? You got the feeling that way up there, at least in the top 3, would be when I got to play for Coach. So it's really something that's not to miss out on. And um, and it's never too late. By the way, here's a word of advice if you're younger, and I can't imagine younger people listening to this depressing podcast. Uh, a lot of times we'd like a mentor, but we don't want to bother them. They're busy, they're professors. And and for many of them, it might be true. But something that I learned, because for years I thought, oh, giving me the gift of their time. A lot of people wanted their time. Uh, I think I was different from their other mentees because the gift of their time and the super gift of their esteem for me was more than enough. I never asked any of them to do anything. I never hit on any of them, which I think, maybe one of the reasons they like to see me. But what I realized is that I was giving them the gift of my interest in their wisdom. I think a lot of them, their families didn't necessarily want to hear their wisdom. I hope I have time to share some of my wisdom with my family. Hope they want to hear it. And a lot of times, when people are meeting with them, they want an introduction to a connection. They want something from them. Yes, they may like them. And in Warren Bennis's case, people loved him. But what I realized, and if you're thinking of having a mentor, pick someone in which you don't think they have an edgy, narcissistic personality. But if you give them the gift of your interest, and if you would approach them, and if you're in a university, you can say, I have so many years left, and I took your class, or I've heard you speak. And one of the things that astounded me is just how wise you are. You really know what's important. And is there any chance that I can spend a little time with you and be of service to you, carry your books, whatever you want? In exchange, maybe you'll share a little bit of what you've learned is important. So anyway, I'm trying to do this with this crazy podcast, and I hope you got a little bit of that in this meandering podcast. And I hope you'll stay tuned for the ones that follow. And until then, find a mentor, be a mentor.